Shogun's my favorite TV show of 2024 so far, and I'd even argue that it's one of the best of the early 2020s. Everything about it, from the acting to the cinematography, is outstanding, and now as the show's coming to the end of its first and likely only season, everything's being turned up to 11. Spoiler warning if you haven't seen the show, but the deaths of Nagakado, Hiromatsu, and now Mariko have been given to us 3 episodes in a row, and the show's done brilliantly to present these to us in such varied ways that it maintains the shock factor and prevents them becoming stale tropes of the show. Each death has actually had its impact magnified with each episode because they've happened in such quick succession with no breaks in between. Take for example the death of Mariko. The episode teases us her death multiple times, but she avoids dying on each occasion, giving us a full sense of security with her character. By the time her death actually does take place, it's at the one point in the episode where she's at her safest and we have no reason to believe she's in any danger. In fact, Shogun comes really close to watering down the impact of her death by just having her be another character to commit seppuku. At this point in the show, we've already seen seppuku committed multiple times, not to mention we just come off the back of Hiromatsu's incredibly emotional one, and that can never be topped. Mariko's death rides off the back of Nagakado and Hiromatsu, giving her fatality an extra dimension of emotion which wouldn't exist had it happened at any other point in the show. But it works because of the variability of each character's death, whilst also delivering an equal amount of shock which cascades onto the next one given the close proximity they have to each other. Nagakado's death is the most poetic of the 3. He's the naive kid who's desperate to go into battle despite having never fought in one, and his decision making, despite his heart being in the right place, is reckless and it leads to his own capitulation. He's constantly told by those around him that war is not as glamorous as he thinks and that it should be avoided at all costs. Toranaga even says to him, why is it those who've never fought in a battle are so eager to be in one? But this is something that Nagakado just never understands, because as he tells his uncle, he sees dying in battle as being a beautiful death, and it's exactly that naivety and over-eagerness to prove himself that ends up killing him. Hiromatsu's death, on the other hand, is pure dramatic genius. For me, this is the moment that Shogun officially enters the recent television great status alongside the likes of Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones. For one, the acting from the entire cast is incredible. There are moments when no words are being said, but so much emotion is being conveyed through just the actor's eyes, and there are so many layers to this scene. Like, we have the backdrop of Toranaga doubting his vassal's loyalty, the uncertainty of how Omo's going to react given how outspoken he was about Toranaga, the generals begging Toranaga to change his mind, and then of course Hiromatsu's threat of seppuku and Bunchiro having to be his father's second. For the first time as well, we see genuine shock and concern from other characters at the suggestion of someone committing seppuku, which really added a lot of extra tension to this scene, because usually in this show when seppuku suggested, it's kind of just accepted by those around them. But for Hiromatsu it's very different, and it just shows how highly respected he is. And Shinsuke Abe as Bunchiro I think comes really close to stealing the show in this scene. I think he's actually really flown under the radar in general for this show, and the emotion he was able to portray as he accepted his duty as his father's second and then being denied death was really well done. But as I say, I think everyone in this scene does an incredible job, particularly the trio of Toranaga, Hiromatsu, and Bunchiro. So Hiromatsu commits seppuku, Bunchiro chops his head off, and it's one of the most devastating, perfectly scripted, perfectly acted death scenes I think I've ever seen, especially for the fact that they made this seppuku extra gory, and it really makes you start to dislike Toranaga, because his surrender really does seem unnecessary, especially now that it's resulted in the death of such a loved character. And that's the real genius of this scene, because it's then revealed that Toranaga has no intention to surrender after all. But the thing is, he needs Osaka to believe that he will, and that means that he needs them to think he's been defeated, which in turn means that he needs his own men to believe that too, so that it all looks as real as possible. It really twists your emotions around, because now that you understand the game that Toranaga is playing, the events that just unfolded are so much more tolerable, and you immediately start to feel for Toranaga, because you then realize that he had no choice but to watch his best friend die for the greater good. So after all of that, you go into episode 9 thinking they can't possibly do something like that again for a third episode in a row, but of course that's exactly what they do. As I mentioned earlier, Shogun does an excellent job here, because at this point in the show it would have been really easy for them to fall into the trap of losing the shock factor and just giving Mariko a stale death, but by teasing us with the possibility of her being killed by seppuku, which at this point in the show we've seen multiple times already, the show opens us back up to being shocked when she actually does die in another way, because after Ishido tells her that she is now allowed to leave, it looks like Mariko's getting a happy ending. She's getting back with Blackthorn, she doesn't have to kill herself, so the introduction of the ninja assassins just comes out of nowhere, and because Mariko has already escaped exploits multiple possibilities to die in this episode already, she feels like the character who's actually least likely to be killed. And that's how the show really gets us. Even when they're barricaded in the storehouse and Blackthorn's trying to move the crate, which for some reason Yabashigi doesn't help him with, the last thing I expected was for Mariko to sacrifice herself. And when you combine this with the previous 2 killings of Nagakado and Hiromatsu, it just hits on a completely different level. I really don't think Mariko's death would have hit in the same way if this had happened at any other point in the show or if she had committed seppuku. These 3 deaths were delivered to big characters in such brutal yet varied ways that it avoided the easy trap of losing the shock factor and just becoming a series of stale deaths. And the back-to-back nature of them makes this incredible show even more compelling. But that's just me. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments what you think of Shogun, hit that like button, and of course subscribe to this thing that I'm doing. I'll see you in the next video. Have a good one.